Traders Library is proud to present the Trade Secrets video series. This exciting new series is the first of its kind for traders and investors and provides tactics and insights from experts like Oliver Velez, founder of the Pristine Day Trader in Day Trading Today.
But before we can have an intelligent discussion about day trading, we have to actually define what day trading is.
David Nasser is author of How to Get Started in Electronic Day Trading and the How to Get Started in Electronic Day Trading Home Study course in Day Trading 101, Myths versus Reality.
To abandon what you're doing now that's working for you and completely throw it out the window and start over on a complete micromanagement or micro-trading approach is a mistake. You've got to have a complement of what's working for you now as well as some new ideas that you integrate or work into over time.
Robert Deal, founder and president of TradingSchool.com and author of Trading the Plan in Day Trading Tools, finding the right combination of data and software.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are tools and there are toys. Don't be foolishly cheap. You will lose more money trying to do that flip-flopping around because you do not have 100% focus. You've got to have focus.
Michael Smith, president of Big Easy Investor in Effective Short Selling, profiting in bull and bear markets.
If you have a $2 stop limit, in other words, you get in at the open, short it, and you cover your short, buy to cover at $2 down, those are trending at 241%. Interesting data.
Van Tharp is author of Trade Your Way to Financial Freedom in Disciplined Trading, How to Trade Your Way to Financial Freedom.
To me, one of the most valuable things you can do as a trader is to continually monitor yourself for how you are, what is it about you that's producing your results. And as you discover that, it opens up a whole new world.
Here's Ted Tesser, author of the Trader's Tax Survival Guide in Cut Your Trading Taxes in Half.
It was once said by a Supreme Court judge, and I forget the guy's name, that there are really two tax systems in this country, one for the knowledgeable and one for the ignorant. And I truly believe that. And it's my job this afternoon to try and put you people in the second class, in the ones who know something.
Mark Selesnoff is managing partner of TrendTrader.com in Technical Analysis 101, Volume, Moving Averages, and Relative Strength.
Most of the successful traders, if you read Market Wizards and some of the excellent books in trading, you'll find that most people are trend traders, meaning that the big money is made with the trend. I want to try to save you some money because it costs me a lot of money to learn to not get out of trades prematurely.
Misha Sarkovich, author of Electronic Day Trading Made Easy in Day Trading Made Easy, How to Write a Detailed Trading Plan.
In my opinion, the most cost-effective way is to buy day trading books because they're very affordable. Like, for example, this Electronic Day Trading Made Easy will cost $29. It's like 300 pages. There's a wealth of information, in my opinion, a lot of information that can be obtained from $29. And this is not the only book on the market. There are a lot of books on the market. My point is you should read as much as possible.
Hal Massover, author of Stock Trader's Guide to Trading the S&P 500 Futures in Stock Trader's Guide to Trading the S&P 500 Futures.
If you didn't have the ability to sit in front of a computer, which a lot of you are at other jobs, but you had the ability to check on prices through the day, you could monitor the S&P remotely and still use these techniques without using a chart.
All of these videos and over 3,000 other investment-focused products are available on the Traders Library website at www.traderslibrary.com. That's www.traderslibrary.com. Go there now and sign up for weekly email specials that'll get you free books, free videos, and information on new products and upcoming conferences. Or call 1-800-272-2855, extension T188. That's 1-800-272-2855, extension T188. Traders Library, providing solutions for investors for over 10 years.
My name is Van Tharp, and I have two roles in life. One is I'm a coach, and by coach I mean somebody who finds very talented people, teaches them the fundamentals, and fundamentals in this case doesn't mean fundamental analysis, it means the fundamentals of the process of trading, and then make sure they follow those fundamentals, because trading is as much reflects your performance as any form of athletics reflects your performance. And there's a bottom line measurement, your profits, or the smoothness of your equity curve. So that's one of my roles. The second role I have is I'm a modeler. And by modeler, I mean I find people who do things very well, and I find out what they do in common, and then develop a model out of that I can train other people. And when I get the results that I'm expecting, then I know the model works. And I've modeled the trading process. That came into my home study course, which many of you probably saw way back and came out 10 years ago. And then I did a lot of seminars with Ed Sakota, Tom Basso, and we were, all of them stressed money management, which I now call position sizing. And so we modeled that process and how important it was. And then we used to say that trading was 60% psychology and 30% money management and 10% system. So I thought, well, I'll model a part that's not system. And that came out to be basically this book, Trade Your Way to Financial Freedom. How many have read it? About a third of you. And for those of you who have read it, you'll find it's quite psychological. A lot of the people have biases to do all of the wrong things. Now, I was in the original Market Wizards in 1989. How many of you have read that? A few more. Then, if you haven't, that should be your first read. And at that time, you know, I'd worked and interviewed people like Ed Sakota and Richard Dennis and Marty Schwartz and a number of others. And I knew how they thought, what the process was for trading. But my goal at that time was to produce people of that quality. And that takes a while. I mean, you don't go out, apply the model. You have to have a long track record. And not only that, you have to have a long track record with a fairly substantial amount of money. If you don't have any money to begin with, it takes a while to get up to that, and then you have to have a fairly good track record after that. Well, I've got people now, I've got several stock traders with well over $1 million who are making 100% a year. I have an arbitrage options trader who I worked with in 1987, and he made well over 50% a year for 7 years while he was doing that particular business, and I think he had 2 losing months in the 7 years. There are a number of others. I have a S&P day trader. I have a couple stock day traders. And my star is David Mobley, who wrote the foreword to my book, who's got about $500 million under management, mostly offshore. He has only had, well, he's up on average of 50% net to investors after his fees every year since 1992. And I think he's had 5 losing months, none in the last 2 years. So that's where I was, and now and at this point I don't need to, I trade my money with my traders. In other words, I have a substantial amount of money with them. They trade it. Since they're earning those great rates of return, I don't need to work anymore. So I've kind of established a new goal, which is to have an offshore fund that basically, well, there's several goals. I'd like it to be such that any one of you could participate in that fund. So we have some problems in that Americans aren't supposed to participate in offshore funds, and you know, most funds are for qualified investors, so there's only so many who can participate. Well, we want to invent the structure where you can participate if you've got $25,000 or something of that nature, earn the kind of fees that we're earning. I want about 25 of my traders in that fund doing it. And my profits, I want to go to charities that sort of figure out or transform how people think, because that's what I'm all about. And that's what this talk is all about. It's all about transforming how you think, and it's all about the differential, in the discipline that comes, that's essential for the trading process. In a way, it's a continuation of the first talk. How many were in the first talk? Well, what we did in that seminar was we played a game. Took most of the seminar, but we played a game, and all I did was draw marbles out of a bag. And 60% of those were winning marbles, 40% were losing. There was a 10-to-1 winner and a 1-to-1 loser, and what it represented was a system. And the point, I divided the room into 3 groups, and each group had a specific objective. This third was to make as much money as they could, and I wanted at least a third of the room to go, or half the room to go bankrupt. And this third, their goal was to make, to double their money. And this third, their goal was not to lose any money. Each group had a different kind of distribution of final equities. We didn't assess all of them, but it was pretty clear that generally they were following the thing. And the interesting thing is, except for the zeros, the people who went bankrupt, we assessed 30 people. Every one of them had a different equity at the end, and they all got the same trades. So there are only 2 factors involved. First was how much you risked, which is what I call position sizing. And the second was the discipline involved in following the system and doing whatever it was and not getting crazy. Well, this talk is about that second phase, which is the discipline. Now, the main reason why it's so difficult for most people to follow a system is because we are exposed to a vast amount of information. That information doubles in less than a year. I mean, the thought was it took from the year 0 to the year 1500 for information to which humans were exposed to first double. Well, now it doubles in less than a year. And you as traders get exposed to probably more than anybody else. And the only way you can process all of this is to do what's called judgmental shortcuts. And there are a whole lot of shortcuts that come into play, and the whole area of behavioral finance in the academic world is about that. But I'm kind of about applied behavioral finance. Because the key is not how to use the stuff to predict the markets. The key is how to use this stuff to change yourself. Now, to give you an idea of your limited capacity, I'm going to give you a series of numbers, and I'd like you, without writing them down, to see how many you can remember. 37, 51, 29, 8,219, 41, 9,273, 82. Anybody got them all? Probably got 82, right? Well, each number could be considered a chunk, but I threw in some big numbers, which actually might be 4 chunks, all of which kind of illustrate how we can only process a certain amount. So we've got to have all these shortcuts to get in the way. In addition, we've all got these emotions that come up. And somebody asked me on a radio interview the other day, are there any positive emotions that are good for traders? I don't think so. You know, if you like profits, if you get really exotic or elated about profits, why then you tend to take them too soon, or you think you are the market, both of which are disasters. You really have to be very neutral so you can stay in the now. So as we get through this, My overall model for successful trading is in this inverted pyramid here. At the bottom, I've got what I call inner strength. It's kind of like being very clear. It's like allowing yourself to go with the flow and not get anything in the way, such as all these judgmental biases that we were talking about. So everything kind of filters through this, and this is kind of the area we're going to focus the most on in this talk. On the right side, you have what I call the 10 tasks of trading. And actually in your notes under Hank Prudence, no, I'm not going to talk about them today because that would take 2 hours to do. But under Hank Prudence notes, you've got actually a listing of the 10 tasks of trading. And above that is discipline, part of also what we're going to talk about today. And above that is like a business plan. How many of you consider yourselves professional traders? Raise your hand. And out of you, how many of you have a business plan? And that's pretty good because trading is a business. Most people fail because they don't plan. Most businesses fail because they don't plan. And most traders fail because they don't plan. Of the rest of you, how many have a plan? Written business plan. Not very many, and it's one of the steps you need to take. On the other side, I've got system development and testing. Once again, that's the topic of my book. And money management, which we've already talked about, and that was the topic of the prior talk. And by the way, I call that position sizing now. I looked that up in the internet once, the topic of money management. And I came up with everything from managing other people's money, how to get yourself out of debt, controlling risk, and even the money management books, such as Ralph Vince's. Ralph Vince considers money management how to make the absolute most money you can. And so I've changed it to, and I remember being on a panel once where we were talking about parts of a system, and there were several people who'd written books, and they were talking about parts of a system. Nobody mentioned what I called money management. I said it's the most critical part. Nobody mentioned it. And one of the other panelists said, well, I always believe in a money management stop, meaning $1,500 stop or something like that. Again, that's not money management. So I changed the name to position sizing, which tells you how much. And that's really the essence of meeting your objectives in trading. With position sizing, you can meet your objectives. And it's a critical thing to know about, but it's not as much the topic of this seminar or this workshop. Now, the factors involved in discipline, let's see, get that a little bit more centered for you. The most important factor, I'm continually asked, what's the most important factor of great traders? And to me, it's responsibility, or a topic that I call respondability. Now, one of the things I usually do in that game, and I didn't do it in this particular game because I didn't have the time to do it, is actually I did, but I didn't do this part of it, is I assign losses to particular people. Because when you pull marbles out of a bag, you're going to have streaks. So, if Roger here happens to pull out a losing marble, I'll have him pull out another one, and then another one. So eventually there's going to be a long streak, and somebody's going to be assigned to it. My guinea pig here was actually Omar, who pulled out a 5-to-1 loser, and then 3 or 4 others, and everybody was groaning, and everybody wanted to short Omar. And I actually gave them a chance later, and so then he pulled out a winning marble. So, and if I were to ask the audience, how many think you went bankrupt or you lost money because of Omar? I'm sure I would have gotten some hands raised. And if a person raised their hand to that, it means they learned nothing because they thought Omar did it to them. It's like the market did it to me, or my broker did it to me, or the software's no good, or the system's no good. All that happened is that certain people didn't manage or didn't practice proper position sizing. The streak that happened to hit them was produced by Omar, but you could just as well blame me for playing the game in the first place. So this gets really, really, what tends to happen as a trader is that you must assume some sort of responsibility for everything that happens to you. When you do, if you ask yourself the question, how did I produce that? Then you can say, did I make a mistake? How did it come about? And you can fix it. If you say, Omar did it, or they did it, or the broker did it, or the market makers did it, then you get to repeat the mistake over and over and over again. I played this seminar in the Orient, or this game in the Orient in about 9 different cities with an audience of about this size. And I remember one group, and I said this generally applies. If you blame it on somebody else, well, this one lady basically said, well, I have a problem with my husband. And I said, it's him. And I said, well, if you blame it on him, you got to repeat that mistake over and over again. She said, no, I'm divorcing him. Which to me illustrates the point. She's going to repeat the mistake again. She'll probably find somebody who does the same sorts of things. We're going to talk a little bit more about respondability, but I want to get into a few of these other things. The second area that really tends to interfere with discipline is the emotions. And the emotions tend to be, a lot of you grew up with John Wayne as a hero, and you learned that men don't feel their feelings. And women had unusual role models too. But the idea is you don't feel your feelings. And if you had a temper tantrum when you were a kid, I'm sure mom and dad decided you shouldn't do that. If you were fearful, mom probably patted you on the head and said, there, don't cry. And you got the idea you shouldn't feel your feelings. Well, what happens when you feel feelings, when you don't feel your feelings, is that you stuff them inside. They stay inside you, and then they tend to come up over and over and over again. Let me give you an example of how that happens in a way you can probably understand. And it usually happens earlier than this, but here, this will be the example. Let's say you're a teenager, and you see an attractive woman or man, and you decide you want to go out and ask them out. So you kind of wander up and, hey, how would you like to go out with me? And this person's had a bad day and goes, get lost, creep. And suddenly, you feel really rejected. Okay. She's no good, or he's no good, and you kind of wander off. And then you think, I shouldn't feel that, so you stuff the feelings. Now, another week goes by, and you see another attractive person, and you want to approach them. And you start off, and you get about this far, and it's kind of like a voice goes off in your head and says, remember what happened last week? You felt like this. And it releases a tremendous amount of this stored rejection. Now this girl has suddenly, or guy has suddenly rejected you even though nothing's happened. You suddenly feel really rejected. Let's say you get braver, you get about here. Well, now the rejection feelings are probably almost as strong as they were at the moment of rejection. You get about here, you know you're going to be rejected, so you probably approach them something like, you wouldn't want to go out with me, would you? Which produces the response you expected, get lost, creep. And so what happens is you reinforce the cycle. And you get this, and it comes up over and over again. You have problems with rejection because you didn't want to feel the feelings in the first place. Any feelings you don't want to feel will come up over and over again in the markets. As an example, let's say, I'll just kind of draw it with my hand. Let's say you're trading breakouts. Market comes up, breaks out, you get in, you place a stop down here, starts to go up a little bit, and then it starts slowly going down like this. Boom. Low point of the day, that's you getting stopped out. Now it goes up, and now you realize it was a low point of the day. Well, that's a good thing to trigger your anger. Now you're angry. Goes up, ticks up more, you're getting more and more angry. Goes up more. Now it's about your entry point. Now you're really angry. And then it ends up way up here. And about the time the day closes and it's way up here, you realize you've just missed the second entry point. So now you're furious and you go home and yell at your spouse and kick your dog, all because of stored feelings relating to some emotion. Now, some of you probably have fear. You know, you can find lots of reasons to be fearful. Oh, if I get in that, if I don't put a stop real close, it's going to come down and take me out. Or if I get in this move now, it's going to take me out. Or, you know, this looks like a good signal, but I don't think I'm going to take it. They always get me. All these reasons to justify fear or any other emotion. So we're going to talk about some ways to deal with emotions in a few minutes. The next thing that tends to go on is conflict. This is based on the assumption that you have parts of yourself. And every theory of personality that I know of assumes you have parts. Freud says we have an id, ego, superego, and certain psychosynthesis assumes we have thousands of parts. Well, I let you assume you have whatever parts you think you might have, which is like roles you have in life, feelings that come up. You know, that rejection feeling I illustrated could easily be a part that's talking in your ear. Now, what happens is, here's a common example. Let's say you have an excitement part. And your excitement part, you know, somehow you tend to suppress excitement and you don't go skydiving and hang gliding and things like that. Or maybe you do, but you don't get enough. Maybe that's once a month, and this wants action every day. So it goes into trading. And you could watch your screens and the little blips, and, oh, it's going up, buy. And then, oh, it's going down, sell. Buy, sell. Well, good trading tends to be boring. I don't know how many of you agree with that, but it is. Good trading tends to be boring. And if you're really into the excitement, you've got to find some other things to do. In a case like this, if you recognize how a part of you like this is sabotaging yourself, give this part other things to do that aren't quite as disastrous for your financial well-being. The last area I will cover just briefly is what you believe about yourself. It's kind of the bottom of the hierarchy. Let me just show you a figure that's I'm not going to go into this in detail, but we have a series of beliefs. And beliefs about the environment, well, most of what I've said so far in this talk has been environmental beliefs. There's lots of them. There's beliefs about your behavior, you know, which might be, if I bang this desk, Richard will his hair might stand up on end, especially if he isn't expecting it. That's just an environmental belief I happen to have. Capability belief. Are you capable of doing something? If you believe you are, then you have a chance. If you believe you aren't, you won't even do it. Value, what's important to you. And then down here is identity beliefs. And this is what you believe about yourself, and most importantly, it's how worthwhile you believe you are. If you, for example, have a belief that if I'll feel better about myself if I become more successful financially. How many have a belief like that? Honest ones, please. What happens is, that's two levels of beliefs. It's a behavior belief, which says, I'll feel better about myself when I become more successful financially. But then there's a belief about yourself and your self-worth, which basically says, you know, I don't really feel that good about myself. Since these tend to form a hierarchy with this down here, then this tends to get a precedent. And it produces more effect than any of the other. It's going to predominate. So you start making money, the belief about yourself will come into play, cause you to lose, will probably cause all of those feelings to come up that we talked about earlier, or the conflicts, and might be the root of it. So let's take a look at self-esteem, or let's go to responsibility first. I like to do exercises in seminars because I think you experience a lot more from exercises. So what I'd like you to do is take a few minutes and write what? Write down 3 of your biggest trading problems, and maybe 3 of your biggest life problems. And if you can't think of any, that's already a problem. So those of you watching on the tape can do it that way. Just take some time. 3 greatest trading problems, 3 greatest life problems. Okay, you can work on this a little bit later if you haven't finished, and you probably don't have an exhaustive list, certainly in the short period of time we've done this now. These problems can fall, it's the way you stated the problem that's really important. What happens with the problems, with the trading problems, let's say you wrote down, I get angry at the market. Well, that's emotion inside. You can fix that. I'm fearful, can't pull the trigger. That's emotion inside. You said, I don't have a system. That's blaming it on something else. They get me. Floor traders get me. I can't find the right setup. Whatever it happens to be, you're going to find that generally your answers fall into 2 categories. One of them has to do with something happening inside of you. So look at each of your answers and see whether it's something happening inside of you or whether it's something outside of you. If it's something happening outside of you, start thinking about how you produce it, because then you can do something about it. Otherwise, you're doomed to repeat that for the rest of your life until you figure it out. And the example, again, is the lady who wrote down her spouse. Her spouse is the problem. You know, she's going to find spouses who are problems for the rest of her life. Now, I'm sure none of you wrote that one down, since I already used that as an example. But if you wrote down, my spouse presses all my buttons, or my spouse makes me angry, or my spouse does this, then it's stuff inside that's you, that you can work on. And then you can change those things. Sometimes it's a slow process. In fact, to me, one of the most valuable things you can do as a trader is to continually monitor yourself for how you are, what is it about you that's producing your results. And when as you discover that, it opens up a whole new world because, you know, there are things like that seem to be like acts of God that happen to you. Good example, we ran a trading school about 8 years ago, and we screened 200 people to get 20 people into the school. And I did in the initial part of it was a phone interview, and then we did a 2-day seminar as a screening process. And one of the key things I was looking for were people who were really ready to own their results. Now, we had somebody in that class who was quadriplegic, could barely use one hand, and it was a result of a football accident. Now, he was really upset at this idea of responsibility because it was like, well, there's no way I produced that football accident. It just happened to me, and now I'm a victim, and I'm in this wheelchair. But he started thinking about it. He didn't get accepted into the school, but he started thinking about it. He did some consulting work with me later, and he said to me later on that the most freeing moment of his life was when he decided that in some way he was responsible for the football accident. He set himself up mentally. He was ready in some way for that kind of thing to happen. When he made a shift internally to decide that in maybe even just a little small way he was responsible for it, the real shift was because now, for the rest of his life, he was now in charge of his life. He could create it as opposed to being a victim. And the first thing he did after that is go out and get a handicapped dog that was designed to perform certain tasks, like roll him over in bed. He didn't have to have a nurse to do that. He became more independent. The dog would do it. The dog was very smart. He could train it to do all kinds of things. Trained it to go into the refrigerator and get him a beer. So suddenly he had a whole new control over his life simply because he adopted this whole area of responsibility. And when you do that as traders, begin to think that everything that happens to me as a trader, I somehow created, even if it's just your response to it, you're on the road to turning around to becoming much, much more successful. Another exercise. Let's see, is that in the middle? Now, all of you should have this, but for those of you who don't, I'll read them out. This is what I call a self-image inventory. What I'd like you to do is rate each of these 10 items on a 0 to 4 scale. 0 being it doesn't apply to you at all. 4 being it applies to you very strongly. It definitely applies to you. So the first item is, I tend to take losses personally. Now, does that apply to you? Yeah, 0 to 4. Rate it on a 0 to 4 scale. Second item is, when people give me gifts, I tend to feel uncomfortable, or I need to give them something in return. Rate that as 0 to 4. Number 3, I tend to blame others for what happens to me or for my problems. 0 to 4. Number 4, I don't really enjoy being alone with myself. Rate yourself there, 1 to 4, 0 to 4. Number 5, I have trouble being open with other people, and I tend to hold back. Rate it 0 to 4. Number 6, I often need to defend what I say or what I do. Rate that 0 to 4. Number 7, I feel put down when criticized. Zero to 4. Number 8, I tend to have some shame, guilt, and blame. Probably should be an or. Rate that 0 to 4. Number 9, I get jealous about the good fortune and success of other people. Number 10, I need approval, attention, praise from other people to really feel good about myself. Rate that 0 to 4. Now give yourself a total. Total your answers, 1 to 10. Okay, how many had a score of 5 or less? 3. So my guess is you're either this test would suggest that you have very little problems with self-esteem, that you're probably fairly successful with the markets, and or you delude yourself. The first person I gave this test at a talk before the Managed Futures Association meeting in Las Vegas maybe 10 years ago. That's where I first met Tom Basso. He was the only one in that whole group who raised his hand to that. And I see a lot more now of scores in that range, but he was like one of the first I'd ever seen. And I thought, you're lying. But I met, we talked later on, and he and I became best of friends, and we probably did 20 seminars together. And that was our introduction, was that particular score. Now, how many scored 10 or less? You probably don't have too many problems with self-esteem. You do well with it. You could probably do a little bit better. 20 or less. You've got areas you need to work on, and it probably in some ways affects your trading. And I won't ask the rest of you. Okay. How many of you read the last chapter in Market Wizards, which was mine? And how many of you remember a technique there, or that I called the wizard technique? So one person raised their hand. That's a technique that I wrote at the time that's very good for controlling discipline or controlling your mental state. It combines a whole lot of things. But I found most people who read that book tended to skip the last chapter. And if they skipped if they got that far, they didn't remember that particular technique. So what I'm going to do is illustrate the technique, and it's something you can use, and we'll talk about the elements that are involved in it. Omar, can I have you as a volunteer? It'll be great for you. We'll use you as your seat now. Can you remember a time when you were really stressed as a trader or in anything else? Okay, well, remember that time. Get into it and act like you're in that situation. Remember what it was like, because we're going to show you how to get out of it. So remember what it felt like. Got it? Okay. Now, what I want you to do is get up. Stand up. I want you to walk over here. Turn around. And I want you to look at Omar. No, this way. I want you to look at Omar sitting in this chair in that particular situation. Now, what does he look like?
He's pissed off.
He's pissed off. So what does a person who's pissed off look like? What's his posture like?
Leaning back, shaking my fist sometimes.
Okay. You're kind of gritting your teeth there?
Yeah, and saying a few words.
Saying a few words. What's your breathing like there when you're in that position?
I'm not really sure.
Probably don't breathe. One of the things people do. Now, what I'd like you to do is to imagine either, can you think of a great trader who might be in that same situation and how they'd handle it? If you can't think of anyone in particular, make one up. It's either one works.
I'm sure they're very cool and calm.
Okay, well, imagine one there and see what they look like in the same situation.
Okay, I just see them reacting instead of watching.
Okay, now go back and sit down and be what they would be like in that same situation.
I'm sure they would be executing instead of just watching.
Okay.
That's all I can do.
And can you do that now?
Yeah, at this moment, yeah.
Okay. Now, that technique combines a number of things to change your mental state. The first thing it does is he gets up. As soon as you get up, you've changed your posture, you've changed a lot of the elements in that state that he was in before. So that's the number one. You want to write these down because all of these will change your state. So number one is that you change your posture. The second thing he did was he went over here and he started looking at himself in that situation. It's called dissociation. When you're dissociated, you're much less emotional. You can be much more objective. So he automatically went from an associated state where he was really into being mad to dissociated where he was watching himself. Both of those are enough to change your state. Number three, he then modeled somebody else. And it doesn't have to be a real person. You can fantasize a super trader. Tom Basso used to fantasize a super trader. So you can have anybody you want be there in that particular position, or it can be somebody you know. It doesn't matter. And you look at what they would look like. Then, and be really observant of what their breathing would be like, what their posture would be like, what their facial expressions would be like, because it all makes a big difference. And then you go assume that position in the same situation. Now this is something you can, if you adopt an attitude of being responsible for what happens to you, then the first part of that is to begin to notice when you're in this kind of state. Most people are just in it. They don't realize they're in it. They're just in it, and it's controlling them. So the first step is to say, oh, I'm doing that thing again. Or this is what, you might say if you look at your trading problems, reframe them in terms of what you do, which might mean I get into that state, and then begin to notice when you get into that state, because then you can do the same exercise. And it's one of the most powerful exercises I know for immediately changing your state, because it combines all of those things. Now, one last aspect of this is one of the tasks of trading. It's one of the most important, and it's a task that I call mental rehearsal. Every top athlete that I know of does extensive mental rehearsal before the game they're playing or the situation they're playing. And mental rehearsal is something you should do. I'll give you one example. I don't have a lot of time to cover, I want to give a few minutes for questions. But Jack Nicklaus, for example, gave his whole strategy for playing golf. It was extensive mental rehearsal. He said the first thing he did was he imagined the golf ball landing where he wanted it to land. And then he looked at the flight of the golf ball that would cause it to land there. And then he saw himself, he was dissociated, he watched himself make a swing that would produce that flight of the golf ball. Then, in his mind, he made that swing from an associated viewpoint, just in his mind, just mentally rehearsed it. Then he might actually take a practice swing, and then he went up and did it. So a very extensive rehearsal process. And I could go on and on and on about this topic. It's so important. Probably I could talk for an hour about it. But Omar might not, even despite the fact that I told him keep a diary, he might not realize when he gets into one of these states. Because what happens under stress, I talked about your limited capacity, but what happens under stress is the blood flow does not go to your brain, it gets diverted, and it starts going about 20% of, normally 50% goes to your brain. Under stress, about 20% goes to your brain, and the rest goes to the major muscles of the body. That's not going to help you as a trader. What it does is it gives you a lot more energy, and it shrinks your capacity for processing information down to pea size. And you do things with a lot more energy. And that's not very useful as a trader. However, if you put things into your unconscious mind through mental rehearsal, for example, Omar knows now he gets into a state like this, he can rehearse in his mind over and over again that particular task. Getting stressed, getting up, doing that task. When he does that, then he's ready for it when it gets into that state. And consequently, it becomes an automatic thing rather than reverting to a primitive type state. So that's the major suggestion for emotionally controlling your state. But let me just summarize. Key factor that I'd like you to remember is that you in some way are responsible for what happens to you, even if it's just your reactions to what happens. When you realize it's not necessarily them, but you're in some way contributing to it, then you can start fixing the process. And we talked about a number of different things, but in terms of fixing the process, it's usually some emotional state that's behind it. And we talked about then that market wizard technique of getting up, which changes the state, watching yourself and what you were doing, which changes the state, modeling somebody else and then assuming that position. And rehearsing that many times so it becomes automatic to you. All of that will make a big difference in your performance. And the first step I would recommend is that all of you read my book about 4 times. And not just once, about 4 times. Because it makes a big difference. And then that gives you kind of a foundation in which you can apply some of these stuff. Because many people, I find, aren't actually doing what I call the fundamentals of trading. They're doing other things. So I have about 5 minutes for questions. Yes?
If you're having a losing streak, 4, 5, 6 losing trades in a row, what is your best, I don't feel that I internalize these necessarily and get mad at myself. But what I find myself doing possibly is maybe taking trades I might not normally take, trying to find a winner. Now, what recommendations or tools or anything do you have to?
First thing I recommend is that you simulate your own system. Because, I mean, even if you have a 60% system and you take 1,000 trades, you're going to have 10 losers in a row. I mean, that's almost a certainty that you'll have 10 losers in a row with a 60% system. If your system's 15%, it might be 17 in a row. If it's like 40%, it could be over 20 in a row, and that's just by chance. So figure out the probabilities of your system, create a marble bag out of it, and when you do that, then start playing that game. Pull trades out of the bag, figure out how much you're risking on each one, and do that as a long process as a form of mental rehearsal. Then then you get used to the 4 winners in a row, and you realize it's just part of the process, as opposed to saying suddenly, my system's broke because these things just happen by chance.
Or I've lost my touch. Or
Right. It's not you. It's a system, but we tend to make it worse by exaggerating that. So when you have streaks like that don't work, that's what I'd recommend. We're going to have software to do that in a few months. So my website is iitm.com, and you can find out about it through that. iitm.com. Other questions? Yes.
You make a reference to characteristics of a super trader, one who makes, say, 40% a year for greater return on a large amount of money, if I remember the phrasing right.
That's my definition, yeah.
What constitutes a large amount of money? 40% was pretty clear.
Okay. Well, it's more than that. I would say the question is, a super trader is somebody who's, say, making 40% a year on a large amount of money. What constitutes a large amount of money? Well, we actually have a program to develop super traders. First phase of it, when they're really getting, I want them to trade initially to be showing they can do that, their system works, means they make at least 40 to 50% with a year with maybe no more than 2, 3 at most losing months. I want them to be able to do that with $200,000 at least, and then then our program is designed to, if they can prove that, to then give them $1 million so that they can do that. And if they can do that with $1 million, it doesn't take long to have all the money in the world, or whatever they can handle at their capacity. So we're talking 7 figures at least. Now I'm not talking, when you get up into the when I talked about an offshore fund, I was talking about maybe 10 billion. I'm not talking trillions or something like that, because you get to the point where you just can't move things in and out of funds and everything else. But, David Mobley's making at least 50% after fees, and his fees are very high, trading $500 million right now with no losing months, at least not in the last 24 months. Other questions? Yes.
You were talking earlier about feelings and that they can get blocked. Obviously, there are varying levels of intensity of feelings. Can you speak about discharging more intense feelings than less?
Okay. The question had to do with discharging feelings, that there are various levels of feelings, some very minor, some more. Well, I'll actually give you a technique. If you've got a feeling that tends to dominate your life, for example, if you are if you've lost somebody close to you and you're going through grief or something like that, and you notice you're doing this 16 hours a day, you have this feeling, what I would suggest is that you go to a neutral spot, like a park bench or something, sit down and say to yourself, all right, I've been doing this 8 hours a day, I'm going to really do it for an hour. So you sit down on the bench and you really feel the feelings. And I wouldn't get into the story behind it, but just the feelings. What's the feeling like in your body? The story tends to exaggerate things, and it's not as significant anyway. Get into what You know, if it's anger, what's the anger feel like? Really get into what the feeling is itself. And then just start feeling it and feeling it. What'll happen is you'll get bored. You know, after 20 minutes, you might be thinking, I have to do this for an hour. And if you do it for 40, it might even tend to go away. Got to keep your agreement, do it for an hour. And you got to do it for at least a week. But if it goes away after 40 minutes, and the second day you only have to do it for 40 minutes, and by the end of the week it tends to be just disappear. So that's what I'd recommend for really strong feelings. Yes, in the back.
Define behavior finance.
The question was to define behavior finance. Behavior finance is really a new area that the academic world has gotten into. It says that we have these judgmental, there are a lot of psychological studies with dealing with various biases that people have, that we have these biases, and the academic world has used it to say, okay, markets are no longer efficient because people aren't efficient, so we're going to use these studies of inefficiency to figure out how the markets are inefficient. It's a new area. Now, that's not going to work. It's not going to be any better than what they did before, because what you've got to do is look at how these inefficiencies apply to you. When you do that, they're studying the right thing, but they're studying it in the wrong way. Yes?
Are there any common traits?
Well, I could probably go on forever about it, but I would say the most important, I'll give you three. Number one is they take responsibility for their results. These are the common traits of super traders. Number two, they practice all these disciplinary sorts of things. And number three, they design a system that fits their personality, and they simulate it over and over and over again. All right, one last. I'm told to cut, so.
You talked about a trading business plan. I have written one, but I've never seen another one to know what one should look like. Is there any place you know of that you can go to, a website or anything that might show what a trading plan should
We will have it one of these days because I'm requiring it of people in our Master Trader program, but we don't have it yet. I'm going to have a software that shows that. My last volume of my home study course does have the elements that should be in it.
Oh, is that in your book?
No, it's in my home study course.
Okay.
Look at my website.
Okay.
Thank you. Cary, North Carolina.